Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, where we're the pressure gauge measuring the divisiveness of U.S. political discourse. And how bad are things right now? Well, besides the obvious attempted assassination of the leading U.S. presidential candidate just this weekend, things have been pretty bad. Here are some numbers from just earlier this year. How likely is it that the U.S. will experience a second civil war sometime in the next 5 years? And 41% of the U.S. electorate says it's at least somewhat likely. 16% say very likely. Those numbers are by far the worst we've seen. They're up 10 points in just 5 or 6 years. Only 20% of the electorate says it's not at all likely. So it's pretty scary. But here we are today trying to piece together what all this means for the race, U.S. politics, and even U.S. history, because this weekend was definitely a historic event. In fact, this presidential cycle has been historic in many ways. Now, you might see some snap polling out today, and maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad, but we thought it was a little too soon to go out in the field. So we're actually putting new questions in the field today for results back tomorrow night or Wednesday morning. If you're seeing this video in the first 2 to 3 hours, there's a chance, if you have some profound questions, that we'll put your question into the field. But as of now, it's pretty obviously going to be a lot of questions about whether this will affect the race and who's to blame. But I guess at the end of the day, all that really does kind of matter is how does this affect the race? And maybe it's a little too soon to tell, but we put together a quick list of about 10 of our thoughts based on our previous polling that we thought were pretty relevant. And here's number one. Here's the 2024 race to date on the right side, smoothed out with a 5-period moving average so we don't see all the wild swings. And you can see that right now, Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden by a massive and stable and potentially unwinnable margin for Joe Biden. And what we've been saying is to expect the unexpected. Just Saturday, the morning of the assassination attempt, we went on War Room and said that there were a few Trump cards up the sleeves of the Democrats that haven't been played yet. Now, we were referring most prominently to the chance that they have in September to send Trump to jail. But I also think it is fair to say that what we saw on Saturday was, in many people's minds, a real possibility. Now, number two, was this a fluke? Was it a momentary lapse of judgment by the Secret Service that was exploited in the most unlucky and coincidental way by some random freaker with a gun? Or was it something deeper and more sinister? We're not going to be able to answer that here, but we can talk about public opinion around events like these, because what people think matters. And how likely is it that the CIA was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate JFK? And a pretty massive number of Americans, 42% of U.S. likely voters, think it's at least somewhat likely. So when we see things like what happened on Saturday, a lot of people immediately jump to the conclusion that the government may have been involved in some way. Now, on that note, number three is that this event will probably contribute in some way to a mistrust of government. Keep in mind, in our polling, look at this one, 53%, a majority of U.S. likely voters, say there's a group of politicized thugs at the top of the FBI who are using the FBI as Joe Biden's personal Gestapo. Only 26% of voters strongly disagree with that statement. So people do think that the government is corruptible. And then there's this. This is really serious, sorry, the typo, time, because this is Banana Republic sort of stuff. Using the law as a weapon against a political opponent is so wrong. Now, this question is about the indictment of Donald Trump. In this case, it was the Fani Willis trial down in Georgia. I mean, look at this, though. 64% of Americans, I'm doing that math right. 64% of Americans at least somewhat agree with that statement. 48% a majority, and way more Americans than would vote for Joe Biden right now strongly agree with that statement. Now, number 4, I'm not really feeling the concepts of fear and confusion in the media. I don't know. Maybe this is just me. Maybe you're seeing something different. But it doesn't feel like people are really afraid right now of young, radicalized, crazy people with a gun. It's just not the same narrative that we see trotted out in the media after most unfortunate shooting occurrences. It seems like it just fits totally different mold. It could be that people are maybe subconsciously attributing this to just, normal run-of-the-mill political violence, or maybe it's that there's this subtext of fear that people have about the government. And that brings us to this. How concerned are you that America is becoming a police state? And I put this question in because the number is just so massively large. 72%, or more than 7 out of 10 American voters, are at least somewhat concerned that America is becoming a police state. 46% are very concerned. People are extremely fearful of their own government. Now, this all being said, people did fear for political violence. There was something different about Trump Biden that caused people to expect things like this to happen. This is from November of 2019, well before the election, well before COVID, well before people saw what happened on January 6th, 2021. How concerned are you that those opposed to President Trump's policies will resort to violence? And 59% of US likely voters, even way back then, even really when this didn't even become about these totally different ends of the spectrum, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, people knew there was something different about Trump. 59% of voters were at least somewhat concerned, 34% very concerned, and only 19% not at all concerned. And here's what's even more profound about that polling question. The sentiment was almost exactly bipartisan. In fact, more Democrats than Republicans were very concerned that there would be a violent reaction to Donald Trump's policies. So where did this come from? Maybe the media and politicians bear some culpability for stoking people's fears of political violence, or maybe the histrionics about how much of a threat to democracy Donald Trump was. To be honest, most people don't really think Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. In fact, 2 weeks after his biggest threat to democracy, the Capitol riot, his poll numbers actually went up. That's right. He left office with a 50% job approval rating, which is more than 5 points better than Joe Biden is doing right now. But that brings us to number 6, and number 6 is about the media. And the truth is, the media, people hate the media. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? The media are truly the enemy of the people. And a stunning 60% of US likely voters at least somewhat agree with that statement. 30% strongly agree, and only 21% strongly disagree. And, there was more of a sentiment with Republicans, but independents also by a majority think the media is the enemy of the people, and a pretty good chunk of Democrats as well. Now, I think as a side note, you're going to hear the word divided a lot on the news, but it's probably more accurate to use the word divisiveness. Now, 2000, that was a divided country. It was like basically split 49.9 to 49.9. But with Trump up 5 to 10 points in this race and winning by 15 to 20 points among independents, I'm sorry, media, but it's not fair to call the country divided anymore. That's not our problem. The problem is divisiveness in the political discourse. This country, it's really in a bad state. And so I dug this one up. Sorry, I didn't have time to make the graphics. This is from just 2 years ago. Who is America's biggest enemy as 2022 draws to a close? Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Republicans, or Democrats? Now, among all likely voters, the winner is China, 25%, just edging out Russia at 20%. But look at the party numbers. Asked among Republicans, 35% say China, but 33% say Democrats. So according to Republicans, Democrats are the second biggest enemy facing the United States. Russia takes a distant third at just 12%. But asked among Democrats, Russia, so they're in a totally different mind state on our foreign enemies than Republicans are. Russia wins by 31%. Maybe I guess it's good. Those numbers aren't higher given all the Russian collusion hoaxes. And again, this is post the Ukraine invasion. But Republicans take second place at 26%. That's incredible. China takes third at 16%. So according to Democrats, Republicans are a far bigger threat to America than China is. That's pretty stunning. Now look at independents, though, just as a quick aside. 26% of independents say China, 21% say Democrats, 18% say Republicans. So 39% of independents say one of the major political parties is the country's biggest enemy. I thought this set was great. 35% plus 33% for Republicans. That's 68%. You know, Biden does have some, ostensibly some ties to China. So 68% of Republicans say that China or Democrats are America's biggest enemy. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say these numbers show a pretty big level of divisiveness. And I think we would probably find even worse numbers if we ran that set today. Now, number 7, the fact is that this event may not actually change anything about the poll numbers, at least in the short term. It's really hard to predict where these things go. I would have predicted that horrifying debate would have made Trump take an even bigger lead in the 2024 race, but it was actually the opposite of what happened. You know, everybody says basically that Joe Biden lost that debate, but it actually tightened the race from 9 points in the two-way down to 6 points. And all of that pickup in support basically came from Democrats who either, I don't know, felt pity for Joe Biden or were circling the wagon. So who knows what this is going to do? Might take a while to figure out. But what I can say is that we do have one night back of Joe Biden's presidential job performance. Now, this is a 5-night blend, an average, and Joe Biden still has a 45% job approval rating. I know you don't like that, but I mean, you know, he's down 9 points here in a race where Trump is winning by only 6. So to me, it makes sense. And of course, if you'd really like to know, this is a roundup from a 44.5. But look, he's being dragged up by Democrats. He has a 78% job approval rating among Democrats. And this was from a post-debate, post-guilty verdict bounce. Democrats are really happy with Joe Biden right now. But in the one night of results that we got post-assassination attempt, I can tell you that job approval really didn't change much at all. His latest couple nights have been at 40%, and they're still stuck there. So these numbers are going to go down, but it's not, I think, because of the assassination attempt. But maybe the race numbers won't change. This is probably going to change the race for presidency in some unpredictable ways. The press and Obama camp were trying desperately to use leftist corporate media outlets to convince Joe Biden to drop out. And this might suck all of the oxygen out of that effort. The cycle is going to be about this assassination attempt and now the RNC quite a while. And there was a pretty narrow window that they all had to get Joe Biden to drop out. I think this might cement Joe Biden as the candidate even more than he already was. You know, this will also give Trump some incredible new imagery in a way I don't think, you know, anybody thought that mugshot could be beaten. Plus, there's probably going to be some major fundraising implications. Maybe Trump will pick up a lot of support, or maybe some people will withdraw support from Biden. Probably, if they're smart, there will be a week or two where the press backs off criticizing Trump, and that may give him some momentum, even more than he would have already had. I think it's fair to say that even the most shameless media outlets might take a cue from what they're doing just this morning by pulling Morning Joe off the TV. If they're smart, maybe they'll do a service to their viewers and attempt to unite the country a bit. Or they could be doing what they've been doing and pour gasoline on a fire and increase the level of insanity in this country. I think what's a little bit more fair to say is that this is going to change the Republican National Convention in a pretty incredible way. It's a huge shift in narratives right on the cusp of this pretty big event. Trump would be wise to exploit it and capture all kinds of new media attention in what would have otherwise been maybe an overlooked event. This might take up the whole week, and that's a lifetime in a rapidly dwindling window to Election Day. It's also probably going to make the RNC contrast really starkly with the DNC, which really could go either way, folks. It may be a funereal, somber event where everybody stoically comes to terms with Joe Biden as their candidate, or it may be sheer and utter chaos if they actually do get Joe Biden to bow out. But what is also fundamentally clear is that it sheds a totally new light on Donald Trump's pick for the vice presidency. And, a week ago, most people really didn't care who he picked. I think it's fair to say it's a lot more important now, which is why you probably just saw that Donald Trump announced that he's going to release the name today. But I think 10, to close on, is a really important point. It wasn't just Donald Trump that dodged a bullet on Saturday. It was American first conservative Republicans. Think about how this RNC would have played out if the assassin had succeeded. Close your eyes. Imagine it. Try and put that picture into your mind of what we would have seen on Wednesday or Thursday, what the selection process would have been like. All right, you got it there? Good. Now look at this. Nikki Haley invited to speak at the Republican convention. On Tuesday, an aide to the former Republican presidential candidate told NBC News that she had not yet received an invitation. So sometime between Tuesday and look at the date, Tuesday and Saturday, she was invited to the RNC. Keep in mind, everybody, she was the last person to drop out of the GOP primary. And although her number of delegates was really pitiful, she was the second highest delegate count. She probably would have had a pretty strong claim at that RNC, as well as some extremely strong establishment backing. And she also checks a pretty important diversity check mark, I will add. And of course, we would never imply that people in his own party would have planned to take Trump out. I think that's too much of a stretch. There's absolutely no reason they would have wanted him gone. But then again, to quote Steve Bannon, there are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. And one more note for establishment Republicans. According to voters themselves, the Republican Party is still the party of Donald Trump and the Make America Great movement. We've asked this question a couple times. The results now have always been the same. You're pretty much stuck with it. 72% of all voters at least somewhat agree with that statement. Only 23% at least somewhat disagree. And 78% of Republicans agree with that statement. 44% strongly. If you want to win your Senate and your congressional races, especially after this event, my advice to you would be to get serious, get behind Donald Trump, and get some unity in the party. Now, there's so many more aspects of this. It's really impossible to cover them all. I mean, geez, the competency of the federal government and how much blame the Secret Service has. What about local police? Then there's the aspect of diversity, which we do have some recent polling on. But anyway, let's cut the video here. If you have something important that hasn't been said, post it in the YouTube comments. Do you think there will be backlash against Democrats, against the media, against the government? Everything is moving so fast. But what do you think the major public opinion ramifications will be? Or will things move so fast we don't even know? I think that's a solid question to ask. But anyway, what did we miss? Drop it in the YouTube comments, like the video, and subscribe while you're there. And if you haven't already, follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_Poll or myself at Mark_R_Mitchell. And thanks for watching.